Benedict, good to see you again, sir. How are you?
Nice to see you. Sorry you're not in the room. I'm very well.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
When the movie started, actually within the first 10 minutes, I'd actually written the word cruel in my notes because I wanted to ask you about his cruelty. And by the end of the film, I'd actually scratched out that word because it didn't seem fair to use that word anymore. So I'm sort of curious, in your first introduction of meeting Phil, whether it be the book or the script, how your opinion of him changed from the first 5 pages to the last 5 pages, because I don't feel like I literally scratched out the word. I didn't feel like it was right.
Then we've hooked you in. We've done something right with our storytelling, because that's the intention. This guy has a pretty mean, abhorrent, angry, and dangerous streak in him, and he is terrorizing a woman for a large portion of the film, the script, and the book in a way as well. Although the book obviously has the ability to go back and give you more of a fleshed out understanding of who this person was before the current story unfolds with Rose and Peter. But in the film, the revelation of what his scars are and his weaknesses, his insecurities, comes quite late. So you lean in and understand and empathize and feel for him. And really, by the end of the film, a man who's beginning to open up to being loved or being able to love again is then cheated of that in a way by what's already been set in motion. I think it's a tragedy, really. It's Phil's tragedy. So I'm very happy you scratched out cruel. And I think the toxic masculinity that is part of him, and that cruelty manifests as that machismo, that gaslighting of a woman, that ridiculing of an effete boy, I think all of that is masking, including his own macho behavior, is masking this vulnerability. And the subject of toxic masculinity is one that's very prevalent still. This novel's almost 100 years old now, and yet, set almost 100 years ago. It's less than 100 years old. It's written in the 60s, but it still is so relevant. And to be able to play a character where that motivation is examined rather than just dismissed or labeled as the problem, but to actually look at the problem and start a dialogue as to why maybe it exists with other men as well, then that's a good thing to be doing. So I'm very glad you got the complexity of him.
You use the word tragedy. I literally texted someone, a buddy of mine was like, "Oh, you saw that?" He said, "You saw that Western." And I said, "I gotta be honest with you, man." I said, "It's more of a tragedy than a Western. Is an oversimplification."
Totally. The Western is a great background for it, but
sure.
You're right. It's not. There are no guns. This is a psychological, quartet melodrama. It's a tense thriller. It's not.
And Netflix was kind enough to let me see it on the big screen, which I'm so grateful for.
Great.
Oh yes, it was beautiful. You mentioned other men going through this, and I hope I'm not off base with this. And please tell me if I am. I was wondering if you could compare Phil to Alan Turing from The Imitation Game. Obviously, one is fictional and one is a very real man. But the tragedy that these men felt in terms of the need to hide who they are, I'm curious, having played both of them, if you at any point in your experience, did you ever feel any kind of a spiritual connection between the two?
For sure. And possibly Peter Gwilym in Tinker Tailor as well. I mean, I think, for sure. And I think their way of dealing with it is very different. Their character makeup and their obstacles, their difficulties are very, very different. So to have something that you can't fully realize as part of your authentic nature, I think is, it's a horrible place to be as a human being, whatever that may be. And there's a very similar strand of pain there, I think, more fully examined perhaps with Alan than with Phil. And I think Phil, the difference as well is that there's so little of his life that actually has experienced that even in his recollection and those moments in what we call the sacred place where he's alone with his thoughts and reminiscences of Bronco, when you really start to see the character open up and see him exposed naked and psychologically naked as well, I think he still doesn't quite know. It's the one thing. He doesn't know what his true nature is. He only knows about that one person and that one moment.
They're giving me a wrap. I really wanted to ask just really quickly. You often hear.
I'm sorry, Jake. That's all the time we're gonna have.
Out of time, man. It's a testament to your performance, and I've got 1,000 more questions for you. But
Thanks,
seriously,
Jake.
This is the best performance of your career. The movie's a masterpiece, and thank you for having such a real, honest conversation with me, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you too. Take care.
Guys, seriously, so good to see both of you. This is probably the two best performances of your career. I'm just in awe of what you did. And Jesse, I tell you this every time. I've got a football signed by the entire cast of Friday Night Lights, except for you, because we've never met in person.
One of these days.
Not
man.
cool,
One of
Jesse.
these days. One of these days. There's a giant space on it that I've told everyone to back off of. That's just for you.
All right.
Seriously, guys, congratulations. I'm just in awe of you guys. I was wondering if we could start out by comparing this acting experience to the one that you had on Fargo. Obviously, in both, you're husband and wife, but on a personal level, not to get too personal, but you're at two different points in your personal relationship. I'm sort of curious as to how different your own personal relationship with a co-star could change an acting experience on set.
What do you think?
Well, listen, when we worked together on Fargo, we got together a year after, but that intimacy of like meeting your creative soulmate first is so, like, Jesse became my favorite person I had ever worked with. So we had that first. And then obviously having like gotten together since then and having a child, to be able to work together, which is, it's rare for a couple to be hired together again. I think that directors kind of shy away from that, even though it was such a thing people would do all the time in the past in like cinema history. They'd always do that. It's something that people like are a little allergic to these days. So the fact that Jane is like, who cares, and super brave and like, I like these actors and I want to see them together, really was an amazing opportunity just to be in like a Jane Campion movie and to do that together. You know, usually couples are in bad movies together these days.
I know.
I feel like.
We still got time.
I know.
No.
And I hope that you take this as a compliment, but at no point during this film did I think about that aspect of it, because you guys,
That's
I was just
cool.
so submerged, and so you guys were incredible. I'm curious about your relationship with another actor whenever they have to be outright cruel and cold to you in a film, because you hear stories about like method actors keeping their distance to help sort of build that wall and separation. I'm sort of curious as to what your relationship with Benedict was like off camera. Did you guys go into the idea of sort of the actors being cold, or is that just sort of a thing we hear about and there's not much truth to?
Well, Benedict, we didn't speak, Benedict and I. They had a very different relationship as brothers. But for him and I, we decided that it was best for both of us not to interact. But also, we don't interact that much anyway. Like, I kind of had to create my own monster of my own psychological torture, because we're not really in many actual scenes together.
For us, it definitely changed once we started, and because we had a few weeks rehearsal before we started shooting. There's so much history, and a lot of it's in the book, but then trying to even fill in the spaces from that. So when you see these two on screen, you can immediately tell what their dynamic is without needing to say much. So it was really helpful to have the time before we started shooting, and then I think it wasn't something that either one of us really talked about, but I think naturally we did slip into those roles as we were shooting.
As we wrap up, and just because I told you I'm geeking out harder, I love you guys. One of the things I love about both of you as actors is how well you both mold into any time period of history that is required of you. Some actors just can't do it. There are some actors who the way I describe it is like, oh, their face looks like they know what a cell phone is, and it just doesn't fit. I'm sort of curious, with all the time periods that you've had to slip into throughout your career, which one came easiest to you, where you genuinely felt like you were most at home?
It's a tough one. Just silent. Hold on, let's just give us a few minutes. We're gonna think this out.
I gotta know where to be.
I mean, my first thought was like modern times, but I don't know. This one felt, because the world. I mean, I know it's lame to pick the movie that you're talking about, but anytime, what helps is stepping onto a set where just every single detail is well thought out and just brilliantly brought to life. The wardrobe, feels authentic. It's really so much of the work is done by the production designer, the costume designer, the director, and so like that goes such a long way. Because there are obviously differences, and people walk and talk differently, but this one felt pretty easy.
Yeah.
You with me?
I don't like Rose is not a pleasurable person to play. It's not like I got to.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of an awful place to live in to play Rose. So I can't say that this was my most fun to slip into, character wise. I don't know. I'm thinking of costumes, and I liked my costumes in the Viva Virgin Suicides, like little Dr. Scholl's with cords in the 70s, and like I like that aesthetic. I love Sophia's aesthetic so much. So
That's such a great film. They're giving the. I know you guys have 1,000 people to talk to. I could talk to you. If you can't tell, I'm just such a massive fan of both of yours, and I could talk to you all day. And truly, I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I hope to talk to you guys again soon.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
One of these
Thank you.
days, I'm gonna sign that football.
It's got the spot right next to it. It's right over there, man. It's right over there waiting for you. Thank you, guys. Kodi, good to see you again, man. How are you?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Doing so well, dude. I'm going to tell you what everyone else is already telling you, but you are absolutely phenomenal in this. So seriously, I truly appreciate you fitting me into your schedule. Thank you so much.
Oh, goodness. No. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Of course, I'm going to jump into this. I want to start out talking about your off-screen relationship with Benedict Cumberbatch. When you have sort of this character who is, at least for a period of time, very cruel and mean to you on camera, does that in any way affect your off-screen relationship with him? Or does the word action kind of act as a sort of a divider between these two worlds?
I mean, it does, but in the best way, all serving a very necessary purpose, which is the film and its themes in mind. He was asked by Jane to approach it with a method approach, and he did that very well. You know, I think it was probably hard for him to commit to that at the beginning because he's very apologetic and he's such a sweetheart. But you know, Jane didn't want any of that version of him around us. So yeah, he was Phil for the most part, and you know, it had a domino effect on all of us, I think, in a very necessary way.
That's unbelievable. So I want to take it a step further because the very first time you and I ever spoke was for The Road. And that's a movie in which a man is very protective of you. And this film is a completely 180 from that. I was wondering if you could compare the two experiences as an actor, where in one you're looked after and protected, and in another you're kind of in a situation where you're forced to step up and defend yourself. I'm sort of curious for how those character dynamics make for maybe two different acting experiences.
That's a very interesting question. But if I can be blatantly honest, I don't think they compare at all. I think they're so far different from each other. You know, there were certain tendencies in the boy in The Road who was very delicate and light and shy, and you know, we have that seeming judgment with Peter, but I think he soon proves that he has a greater power to him, that you know, that is somewhat of a facade.
Mm-hmm. You know, I want to ask this next question, obviously without getting into any spoilers, but I'm curious, the last 5 or 10 minutes of this movie changed my entire perspective and made me, if I was in a movie theater, if they had said, hey, we'll go back to the beginning and start it from the top, I would have done it because I want to rewatch the entire movie with everything that I know. I'm sort of curious, how did this character's actions in the last 5 minutes of the film maybe affect how you played him the rest of the movie? Because you have to know things that maybe we don't really find out until the very end.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting part is that side of it was kind of easy specifically for my character, because I discovered something really beautiful, that he doesn't ever really change. Seemingly he might, but it's our judgment that dances around him, and that's what tells the story of his arc, if he even has one. I mean, I think he's more of a chameleon. He can take on different looks. He can look naive, he can look weak, but he has a lot going on that's internalized, and that was a great challenge, you know, for me to take on as an actor, and with the help of Jane, you know, I feel I pulled that off.
You absolutely pulled it off. As we wrap up, I was lucky enough, like I said, Netflix let me see this on the big screen. And honestly, these vast sort of, you know, sweeping prairies and the mountains and the lines of cattle, it's seriously, the setting itself is like a character in the film. I'm curious as to in what degree the environment around you, what it can do for you as an actor, particularly as someone who has worked on a superhero film where you're surrounded by green screens, what actually being out there does for your process. It's
definitely ideal, I guess, you know, like, I just love nature overall. I love New Zealand. It's a really sacred place for me. So to be able to shoot something like a passion project there, it was extremely special. But yeah, you know, on the other spectrum, I've had to do the blue screen stuff, and it requires just a greater extension of imagination and immersing yourself within the intention and motives, which is more something, I guess, internalized. But every little element that is tangible always really helps. You know, the costume is always a huge part in resurrecting the character, and so I would say the same for the landscape.
For sure. Hey, Kodi, dude, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, man, particularly for this film. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about it for a long time. So I truly, truly appreciate your time, my friend.
Thank you, man.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you, guys.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.